Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is June 19, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Andrew Nicholls, part two. Andrew, thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thanks, Jerry. This is wonderful, wonderful fun. I look forward to this. Yeah.
So we actually only got through 8 questions out of the 40 or 50 in part
Really?
one. And I'm really honored that we really delve deep because that's what my motive is, to just go a little deeper. So the 9th question is, were you raised a particular religion?
No, it's funny. I was born in England, as was my longtime writing partner, Darrell Vickers, and so we were nominally Anglican. But any religion which was founded in order that its principle could get a divorce, I think the adherents realized that they're on somewhat thin ice to start with. So I uh, I was sent when my parents were still young, and I was the oldest, so I was the little kid sent to Sunday school with a big English penny to put in the collection plate every Sunday, and they would read us stories, starting with C.S. Lewis. They'd start with the Narnia stories,
Yeah.
and then get more into the. And I when I was a 7 or 8 or so, apparently, I went home one Sunday and said to my parents, "They really believe that stuff. I don't want to go anymore." So that was that.
That's cool. Now, I have to tell you it's like you never tell comics jokes. You probably know this about telling a comedian a joke. They look at you like, "What?" But I have to, because he is, to me, the most influential comic of all time. His name's Lord Buckley. Huge, huge influence on George Carlin and a lot of these people. And his little joke was, the guys at the sort of criminal types in the church looking at the collection plate kind of thing. It's more like the candles where you put the quarter in and light a candle.
Right.
And he wiggles out the cash or the coin box, and he starts taking the coins out. No one's in the church. And God's voice says, "Sinner, what are you doing?" He says, "Forgive me, Lord. You caught me. I'm sorry. But if I wasn't doing this, you wouldn't have a job." So, do you pray?
No. I mean,
If
in this small p, pray, in that I don't think prayer is distinct from wishing in any way. I wish for things, but pray implies to an imagined entity or to the universe. No, I've never caught myself doing that. I've never had, even in the direst of circumstances. No, it just doesn't occur to me.
if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
It's funny. The first thing that occurs to me is they asked the mathematician David Hilbert the same question in the 19 teens, I think, and he said, "I'd like to know if the Riemann hypothesis is true." So if you had the opportunity to ask an all-knowing being one question, why not ask the thing that has plagued people for 300 or 400 years, in which G.H. Hardy said if he was frozen and came back 100 years or went into a coma, the very first thing he would ask when they woke him up was, have they solved the Riemann hypothesis? And it's a question about the regularity of prime numbers, and all the greats have cracked their heads on it. And hey, you get to the one guy who knows, and then ask him, is there a simple proof? That's the way my mind tends to go. I wouldn't tend to have any questions about
Right.
um, what's good and bad, and why are there guinea worms that prey on the eyeballs of children? No one could defend that.
You know, in prepping for this one, I thought, well, I better watch the first one. And I never watched them. And I had so much fun watching it because you made me laugh so many times. I got to laugh again at laughing at myself laughing.
Oh, that's good. And I don't
No,
think
I mean, I laughed,
I'm not a performer. I've never performed anywhere.
but
My longtime writing partner did take theater arts and did have that urge. And I've, except for occasionally being urged on camera when they needed someone for something, I'm not used to doing that.
Yeah.
I hope it was the substance rather than my funny looking eyebrows that
Dude, it
put
was
it
a
on.
substance. In fact, I told Janet this week at that poetry event,
Mhm.
I said, man, that first answer, what's your favorite form of information? Chocolates on a stripper's belly. Man, that was the best answer I've had in 40 years.
Should try it. We have to try it out, see if more people thought of that.
we
It's funny, I used to work for a company called the Comedy Bank. This is back in Toronto. It specialized in preparing comedy, usually for corporate functions. And so they would give you the things they wanted their salesmen or their corporate executives to remember or to take to heart. And you write little sketches about them, sometimes bringing in comics and sometimes for their own staff to read at a Christmas party or something. And the push of this company, the Comedy Bank, run by a guy named Graham Haley, a real go-getter, who later expanded into something called Haley's Handy Hints, books and books, which I still see in secondhand stores of quick and easy ways to do things, great rules of thumb. But this idea was selling comedy to corporations with the promise that it made the comedy, made the facts easier to remember.
yeah.
And then we found a story. So this was back in 1980. We did a radio series for him first, and then a bunch of corporate jobs that said that when you learn something with humor, you actually remember it less. And so, and by
Remember,
proof of which, they were able to sing certain songs to people, jingles that the people could finish the jingle. They knew it so well. And they said, "What's the product?" And they didn't know. They had no idea what car it was or what brand of motor oil. Something about the comedic unhitches the memory and the imagination from certain more standard structural memories, which so we mentioned this to Graham, who was running this corporation that was entirely based on selling the opposite. And he said, he was South African. He said, "Let's just play that down, shall we?" Yeah.
well, another famous comedian, Canadian poet politician Bob Dobbs taught me, when you're laughing, you're learning. So it's almost like that could be. Is that a flip of you remember less?
I
Yeah,
wonder. I mean, what
it's
you're
different.
learning, you may remember certain things about the situation in which you're laughing. It may produce, oxytocin. You may have a really good feeling about it. But I mean, when you're dreaming, you're learning, for example, right? That's when your memories, short-term memories, get processed through the hypothalamus. Through the hippocampus into long-term memory. If you disturb that form of sleep, you actually can't learn. Whatever you remember during the day just gets wiped out. It doesn't go into where you can access it. I don't know that comedy or laughter, it doesn't seem to me that it quite has that. You can certainly remember, some people remember jokes really well.
Yeah.
They just lodge in there. And there used to be a British program where comedians would stand up in the audience or someone would yell out a single word. And they had multiple jokes. Everyone had multiple jokes on every noun and every verb. Their memory was specific to that. But the people I've known who could do something like that, like, don't know the dates of the Civil War, they're not all, they're comedian savants.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I'll go to quotes again. Um, a person who wrote the book called Evil is a New Yorker writer whose name I can't remember, asked, can you name us, is there such a thing as an evil person? Asked William F. Buckley this. And Buckley thought for a moment in that with his finger up against it. And he said, well, Gore Vidal, of course. That's how he started.
Yes.
If you consider Gore Vidal evil, that book, which is just called Evil, that came about 15 years ago, was asking that question. Everybody has, Pol Pot, Stalin, Hitler. It's easy to rhyme off this list of people, but the question he was saying was, yeah, okay, but they were all good to their families and loved dogs, and Hitler was a vegetarian and all that stuff. Like, so is that like Disney cartoon character evil? Like, I want to destroy mankind? Because there's another famous quote. I forget who was it. Shaw said, "Every man means well." What do you do with that? I mean, if somebody's background information is so screwed up that they do incredible evil, convinced, as the American political situation currently makes clear as possible, convinced that they're helping out, that they're ridding the world of, I don't know, like democratic pederast, goat blood drinkers. If they don't see themselves as evil, does anyone see? I mean, I've written a lot of children's cartoons, which are besides the ones set in schools, where you just have bullies. There's also the hypertrophic evil character Marvel type thing, which has the bad guy. And the bad guy isn't just bad; they're manifests of evil. And it's funny too when you do this for kids show, because they're not allowed to do anything that's really evil. They put gum underneath the chair. That's they're evil, but they always have a quality that I think you don't find in human beings. Did Idi Amin go ah ha 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 before he ate
Right.
his victims' hearts? I don't know. There's certainly, if you were to make a list of the characteristics of an evil person, you can find people who've got all those characteristics. That's as close as I could get to saying sure.
Yeah, that was good, and it also reminded me of Paul Krasner asked his guru, about evil, and he says, "Why is there evil?" And the guru said, "To thicken the plot."
Yeah. We did an episode of a show on Disney called You Wish. It was about a family with a genie, and at one point, someone, through some magical twist of the sitcom, it's one of those Friday night ABC sitcoms, goes all the way to the end of the universe and gets to meet God. And God was played by, I think it was his last performance, a great character actor, Phil Leeds. And the character says, "I'm only going to get to ask you one question, so I've got to ask, why do some people just coast along and other people, folks just like have a terrible, terrible time?" And God thinks about it and says, "Some people I just don't like."
Oh.
And actually, Bill Clinton, so we wrote that in like 96, 97 or so. So that was one of those things written for a show that became a joke, a passed along joke. Guy's hanging from the edge of a cliff and he cries out to God, "Why?" God says, Clinton said that was his favorite joke. So I don't know if it came from our show.
That's funny because another joke I learned from Krasner was the guy falls off a cliff. He's holding on to an edge of the cliff, a root, and he says, "Help, help, is there anyone who could help me?" Clouds part and God's voice says, "I'm God, I can help you. Let go of the root and I'll save you." The guy goes, "Is there anyone else who can help me?"
That reminds me of that great Simpsons line with Homer Simpson hanging from the edge of a cliff. And he looks up and he says, "I know I don't talk to you all that often, but if you're up there, Superman, I'm in trouble."
How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'm going to set it up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, "If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them." Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, "Keep your friends close and your enemies closer." JFK says, "Forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name." And Fellini says, "I need an enemy." So, Andrew, the basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, it implies acknowledging them either to the enemy themselves, "I hate you," or saying to your friends, or saying in public, or writing a story that acknowledges that this person is your enemy. And I think if you read enough John le Carré, in Spycraft, you know that you don't want your enemy to know what you're thinking of them. If you are planning to live a peaceful life or avoid their future ministrations, you don't give them any input, right? I mean, there's that great scene in Tinker Tailor where George Smiley reveals that he gave his arch enemy, Carla, a little bit of insight into himself. He let him hold his cigarette lighter, which had an inscription on the bottom from his wife, and that gave Carla everything he needed to screw him up for the rest of their spying careers. So that's acknowledging the enemy, but also empowering them on the side by giving them some information about you, but letting them know that they bug you, I guess, does empower some people, because some people just want to bug you. And if they know
Yeah.
how they did it and when, they're just going to keep pushing it. That can happen if you're teaching, that can happen with students. If you're, as most of my experience has been in, TV, producing TV, if you let certain people who are vying for the same professional space as you know what they've done that irks you, yeah, that can make it easier for them to get under your skin in other ways. So yeah, Alan, who are your enemies, Alan?
I love how you address them. If you listen to KPFK every Sunday morning like I do, all they go is, yeah, he died in 75, but we still got a whole lot of people who are listening to him all the time. And it's amazing how many kids listen to Alan
Yeah.
Watts now. But I
What's
mean, basically, your kid comes home from school, he's being bullied, or there's some sense of an enemy in your life. What do you do? What's a
have
sort of
have the bully rubbed out and as inobtrusively as possible. Yeah. I'm actually working on, I started an idea yesterday. I'm working on the idea of someone who is a hitman, basically, but in the cartoon world. And so he's actually rubbing out people. And just so before I start writing anything, I'm thinking of the whole idea with what do you do with people who annoy you if you accept that you're kind of fictional and so are they. I
Yeah.
mean, does that raise the same questions in any of these hitman movies where somebody has someone they're hired to kill and they sometimes, whether it's The Sopranos or if it's Barry, if
Yeah.
you have to, or if it's any of Puzo's characters, well, they're just not in our tribe, we have to move forward. Or The Wire, if it's the cop, we kill them. I grind, you arrest. That's what we do, as somebody says. I've had a few bullies in childhood. And I was a very small kid, so I just kept as far away from them as possible. I'm trying to think if I ever got back at anyone. Well, one way as a writer is you can use their names. You can use their names as characters who do stupid things, or you can put their names on headstones, as I was hearing the other day somebody did with an actor who displeased on one series. He had a later series and was going through a graveyard and put the actor's name on a headstone.
Wow.
You're dead to me. I can actually think of, offhand, but I would have to name people. I can think of several examples where people who had access to the public as writers, not poets for some reason. Maybe they're just all too serene. But no, I'm sure Ted Hughes. I'm sure Larkin got back at people.
Yeah.
But where you're able to work that out by embodying the character who is what you dislike in someone, completely embodying them, and then enliven them in a stage play, in a sitcom, in a sketch, and then just destroy them. I mean, I think novelists would often say that that's what they've done. Oh, this kid, she really bugged me, so I made her the one who falls off the cliff. It's neater than yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing because you anticipated the next question. It's almost like you answered it, but I have to ask it anyways. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out of Volta Cinema. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner says sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because you frame it. Because the artist's job is to frame and to point and to move the frame and show where the frame is, and to choose with that weighing of scene, moment, emphasis, framing, focus, color, shadowing, foreshadowing, recollection, the conveyance of pity, the conveyance of all the things we feel for other people. But the camera can do an enormous amount of that. And forget the camera, even on stage, you can take someone who has very few lines and put them amidst other people talking in such a way that casts a light on the non-speaking or the little speaking character, that shades them in such a way that the audience gets something real that they would not have got sitting near that non-speaking person at a party. You're angling attention towards those persons. Everybody lives a life, and every life has its moments. But in a piece of structured linear fiction, say a film, a novel, you're selecting which moments to show, and also subtly, if you're a third person narrator, going into their head a little. In first person, you're directly in their head saying what they think, but removing all the observations about, oh, it's red, I probably shouldn't cross right now. No one wants to know that. You're selecting that. And that's why fiction can be sharp. I mean, it's dragging you by the eyes and by the nose and by the ears and saying, look at this, look at this, look at this, pay attention to this. Don't. And then those, the beautiful writers, in Nabokov, who can, you come to the end and you don't know why you feel something particularly. It's something about a scent. There's gardenias here, and there's there's a pot boiling over with some kind of gravy there, and it just adds up to something, and you don't know how they did it.
Yeah, magic. And it's funny because you brought up the word subtle in part one, and you just used it here. And I wanted you to react, if you could, to Billy Wilder's comment, make the subtleties obvious.
Well, he probably meant something. I mean, because all paradoxical statements generally are cheating by using slightly different meanings of what purport to be the same thing. And the subtleties are obvious because he's pointing to something which, well, I mean, his example was, a guy comes into a room through a door, you got nothing. He comes in through a window, now you got a scene. So that's Billy Wilder talking about how you grab someone's attention. But that's not subtle, but you can do something with a camera. I mean, he worked almost entirely with cameras. He had an amazing life as a reporter too in Vienna. He once interviewed Freud and like Schiller, and he interviewed three mainstays of German early 20th century cultural life in one day. He ran across Vienna and got three people in one day. But when he turned to trying to capture the audience's attention with the camera, you can have very small movement. You look at Saboteur and the tiny, twitch of a finger, or someone going like this, or in The Apartment, you've got, so I've gone for Hitchcock, back to Wilder, Jack Lemmon looking at, looking at Shirley just in that certain way. The smallest movement is subtle. It's subtle in the scene, but it's obvious to the audience. So the audience is not the character. No characters know they're in a show. No comic character knows they're funny, usually. You have to make that clever distinction. And it's something that student writers really struggle with, the difference between why a character does something because the character wants it. I call this the ABC of characters, because the audience wants it, or because the bard needs it. So the ABC of character. And audience includes genre. There are things that the character would not do, which harm them, but the author needs it because you need someone to do something stupid right there. No one would do that. The author needs it. There are things the author does because, if the coyote can't catch the roadrunner, so he goes beep beep and it runs away and it gets away. The writers of those shows wanted to kill that roadrunner so bad, so they wanted to kill the roadrunner. The genre dictates no. The character, the wily coyote, certainly didn't want to get blown up every episode, so you're not doing what the character wants either. So an observation of that distinction, and then just at least an acknowledgement that an awful lot of what you see in a movie, you see the arguments on online forums about, why didn't he notice that the keys to the jail cell were within reach of a person with a broom handle? Because you had to have him not notice it so the guy could get out. So you got the second act. It's not the character's reason. It's not the jailer's reason. It's not, it was a bad police force. He must have, he came out of a light room into the darkness and his eyes didn't adjust. He didn't notice. You can make all that up. And the creator has to make that up to try and foist his own needs, because you need a chase scene and, at the 60th minute or something, to foist them onto characters who don't want any of that stuff. Characters, I mean, in real life, we don't want drama and conflict and action and hatred and enemies and bullying. But without that stuff, what have you got? You've got a PBS documentary on the worm.
So really fun. Thank you. Andrew, just walk us briefly through your tipping point when you decided to pursue being a writer. I mean, you're many things, and I know the encounter with Daryl is important in this, but you're going along in life. You're reading poetry, you're seeing movies, you're reading books. Where did you go? I want to be a reader. I want to be a writer. I can do this. And then the tipping point when I want to be a comedy writer specifically, just sort of, what'd you study in college and how, you're a little past. Yeah.
I was writing stuff just for my own amusement, poetry and stuff when I was little. I wrote a little book called Bleep and Booster Go to the Moon when I was 6, 7 or 8. And I think maybe I talked about that last time. So So as someone who played around with stuff and liked English class, when I met Daryl, we were 12, and we both started writing. I think you're right. I started writing songs right away first. And then Python was on the air in '69. We started watching comedy and then sitcoms, Norman Lear's early sitcoms and stuff that seemed to be, we were still, 7 or 8 years away from SNL and not old enough for most of what Tony Hendrick called the boomer humor, um, Lampoon and that stuff. But we both, I don't know, we both kind of became loosely, we were in a little factory town in Canada. I mean, everybody had a mandatory interview with the principal at their second last year of high school, I think. So you had to go in and talk about what you plan to do. And I said, I want to be a writer. And he said, well, that's not a job. I mean, and I said, look, that's spines of the books. All these books you got here, those were written. Cover of your cereal box this morning. Someone had to write all that copy. They're writers. And he said, well, why don't you take a course in, I think he said, why don't you take zoology in college and then you can write about giraffes. I mean, this was semi serious that he was saying. I said, because I want to be able to change the subject every now and then. I don't want to be a zoologist. So I ended up in journalism school, kind of in acknowledgement of the fact that I wanted to take a class that was pointed roughly where I was going. There was nothing in media writing. I don't know if by 76, 78 had William Goldman written Adventures in the Screen Trade. If he had, I hadn't become aware of it. There was nothing written about the people who were writers, and even the autobiographies I read of, Moss Hart and James Thurber, and I read 100 autobiographies one year of mostly the New York interwar literati. So it would be Mark Conley and the Marx Brothers and Franklin P. Adams and the Dorothy Parker, the Algonquin Round Table crowd, and just leapt from book to book to book to book, not realizing at the time they were all shaped to give a slightly more glowing version of what had happened, especially Moss Hart's. I mean, Katie Carlisle later admitted and later had his papers released, and all the stuff he talked about and how glowingly wonderful it was breaking into theater was nonsense. I mean, he had a terrible time, was horribly depressed, and was a conflicted gay man, and everything in his life was fake and false. But that was a book that I took to heart as oh, it can be like this, and then you throw open the windows and let the rain pour in because your play is a hit. I don't need this apartment no more, Ma. I'm gonna go out and buy you and Dad a horse, and then a house. Maybe the house first, then the horse. And so I was 18, 17, 18, trying to decide what to be. I was really good at English. I was not bad at the sciences, roughly speaking. I mean, when I would speak to adults at that time, they always thought I was going to be a lawyer, which I didn't have any interest in being a lawyer. And, the prestige professions, writing is not one of the, I just hope my daughter marries a writer, that you don't hear that. So, so I just bided 2 years in journalism while Daryl and I just wrote like fiends. I mean, we wrote comedy sketches and sitcom pilots and plays and just poems and long poems and short poems and novels and novelettes and a musical called Rain on My Mind and another musical we started called El Bib and one called it was a parody of West Side Story. I mean, it was just writing. And then we got a gig, when we were about 19 or 20 or so, a low paying gig on a local Hamilton, Ontario variety show. And it started to seem real. And I had never had, there wasn't the stuff you could read, which would tell you, like you can read everywhere now, how much a writer can make, that you can make a living. You don't have to rob Brinks trucks and be a writer. You can actually just do the writing part. I had no idea for so long that was possible. I always thought, you'd need your parents to be sending you $100 a week or something.
Yeah.
And so slowly, we had been in a band. I won some scholarships and bursaries in journalism school, took the money and bought a 4-track recording studio and recorded some songs we've been writing forever and just put them on cassettes and sent them to radio stations. And then we failed to follow up, and some of the songs started getting a lot of airplay. And the question arose, who are these guys? This anonymous tapes arrives. Well, it wasn't anonymous. We had a return. They threw everything out. We even had a lyric sheet and they threw that out. So when it finally, some friend told us one day, I heard one of your songs on the radio today. I said, what? And so we got to play around the Toronto club circuit for a couple of years and earned, I think, a total of, probably $100 each and a lot of beer. And it's still the case. if you're trying to be a musician. This was in the punk era, you know, early new
Yeah,
wave and late punk, 79, 80,
yeah.
81 through 82. That we played our last gig in 82 as Nobby Clegg and the Civilians, and had a record. And but then just looked at each other and noticed that we were writing mostly comical songs, or songs with a heavily constructed funny characters somewhere doing, you know, like Randy Newman. We talked about satire last time. Randy Newman is such a great satirist.
Yeah.
You listen to his Bad Love album, which is a late career album, and they're melodic, beautiful, nice songs, but they're all sung from the point of view of some raging idiot or monster or absolutely unaware, oh, beautifully unaware fools, middle-aged, foolish men with, you know, pursuing young girls, and such a good satirist. And we were doing something slightly like that, but without any success, any financial success. And so we just decided, you know, it's going to have to be sitcoms and radio. We did radio first. That brought us to the attention of some people. We got written up in some stories in the paper. And then Alan Thicke's mother, who was living in Toronto while Alan was in Malibu, and going back and forth Malibu to Vancouver to do a talk show. She cut out an article that mentioned us and sent it to him down in Hollywood, and that pretty well fixed it. That was the end of the band and the start of writing for TV.
Wow.
That was 82.
That's pretty amazing. And you have had a successful career, and it's great. Now, a screenwriting teacher told me great art or great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Intention. Well, I'd probably have to drag you through the definition. I think David Mamet saying that a film or a film scene is a series, is an emotion conveyed through a series of deliberately uninflected shots. So uninflected meaning no kitsch. Kitsch is when you see the clown crying, and that's the shot. You don't have the clown crying. You put together a set of things that don't have intention in them or intentionality, certainly not a strong authory feeling. I now, at this point, though, having had a screen in front of me my whole life, or a typewriter in front of me, I see the intention as clearly as a pencil rubbing of a gravestone. I mean, I find it very hard to watch comedies, certain types of comedies now, because I've been mithridated in that stuff for so long. I tend to see the writing of it instead of seeing it. I don't see the characters. I notice the way they're shot. I notice the over didn't include that actor. He doesn't like him. He didn't stay to shoot the overs for that. And they don't enter at the same time. You think of Cagney and Lacey, who used to have arguments over who left the room first, because the last one who left the room, you got to see her ass. All those stories and all that cumulative experience of writing things that then become produced things eventually can make you jaded. You get PTVSD, I sometimes call it. You get post-television stress. You're just so aware of the process that it's very hard to see. I see the intention. I see the scene coming. I see how it's going to end. I can practically snap my finger on the edits, because I've been in so many edit bays. You know, everything you shoot comes in long. You know, if you're shooting for a 45-minute episode, you come in at 55. So you know the obvious fat, and then you're down to 50, and then you have to start cutting the stuff. And then you have characters who, you know, you can catch them with it, raising one hand to deliver the next speech, and then cuts. You say, oh, so that was the first cut. You see the way they're framed. You see the 2 shots versus the raking shots, how long they had the camera there. Oh, so this was longer. This is a longer setup. Oh, they had a dolly on this, and they wasted that because it's cut down to a single monologue. It's hard not to see the intention after a while. Yeah. I have only been writing fiction for 10 years, and I use that thing. I call it the rejectionizer. It's a forum that you submit your stories to, and you use them to send them to the magazines, because it puts them all through. It squeezes them all through the same pipeline. It's called submittables. It's called submittables, and I have 195 or so rejections on submittables now, and then a couple of sales. So, and even that, you know, I've started to zero in now. I read other people's short stories, and I can sort of see, oh, I see where this is going. You know, I can see why they're angling it this way. I can see why the character has this particular voice, and then I go back and forth, and that's not enjoyable. I I like the childish awe, but I don't have any childish awe left. Um,
Andrew, hey, I wanna hire you if you're willing. I wanna write a New Yorker article, but I mean, I wanna by committee. And I wanna have like 3 or 4 people like you who are so well versed. Have you grown up reading New Yorker?
yeah.
And I think you could, it's almost like a human AI algorithm by getting 5 people like you or us or whatever, and we could write it. And it's amazing what you're saying, but I think this is that phenomenon where, Hunter Thompson typed out The Great Gatsby. So he
Yeah.
learned the form and
Mhm.
then he could write good because he learned, this thing, the anxiety of influence, Harold Bloom, but it's like you master the form from your heroes and then you abandon it. So that's
Mhm.
sort of like the thing you're trying to do is, okay, I know how this is done so well, how do I abandon that and just do it? And so maybe that's why you moved on to writing novels and didn't stay exclusively sitcom writer.
And an advantage of having shows fail, really, and I've done an awful lot of shows that lasted one season or not even one season, is that you get to then jump to whatever's newly exciting you, as opposed to having to contrive some new adventure for the same 6 people you've been writing for a couple of years. What if they got a puppy? What if they go ice skating? What if they all get matched?
Well,
Um,
it, funny you said that because the next question, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your audience when you're writing? So, I mean, separately, let's just say sitcom and novel now. How much are you thinking of your audience when you're writing?
uh, you know, I tend not to. I think that maybe I had once, maybe in my 20s, perhaps I did. You become very aware of audience if you're writing for audience every night, which I did for 6 years. So for Johnny Carson,
Yeah.
and you get a heightened sense. You certainly tunes doing. We're writing for live and for sitcom as well. If it's taped live, if it's multi-camera sitcom, you get a very attuned sense of what people. But you get it quickly. David Lynch worked for 5 years on Eraserhead, and there's even one scene. I watched a documentary the other night about midnight movies, and he was talking about it. He said he had so little money. He says there's a scene where Henry walks through a door. He turns the handle, and then camera's inside the room, and he closes it behind him. He said it was a year in between those two shots while they tried to get. So we shot Eraserhead for a long time, similar to, let's say, how the first Wallace and Gromit film took 12 years, 7, 8 years,
Uh-huh.
longer. Um, and then he cut it as tightly as he thought he needed to. And then he went to the first screening, and the first screening had a full audience. And he doesn't like to sit in the audience. He won't do that. He paces backstage. I'm a pacer. And he said he knew he had cut the best possible version of the film. But as soon as he heard the opening music, he knew it's 20 minutes too long. He didn't know it. I mean, think of how many screenings and how many times you've been in the editing room and how many times you run it through the Moviola or whatever he was cutting on, the Steenbeck in those days. And then but when the audience is there, you internalize the fact and the width and the breadth and the impatience and the weather of them. And you suddenly know. And if you do that night after night after night, I mean, we used to write monologue for Johnny where we would get a joke and say, I'm not sure about this. Or else you would say, oh, this is great, and we'd pass it around when you think, oh, it's surefire. And is this the best wording? Should it end with this word, that word? What's a funnier vegetable? And then you've got it. And then it's on the cue cards. And I would go backstage and the monologue would begin. And Johnny would get close to the joke, it's coming up. And then as soon as he was about to start it, I would, oh, it's going to bomb. But I couldn't tell until then. But right then I could tell. So what is that? Where does
Yeah.
that come from? Why could I not tell? This is almost an unfailing instinct that comes only at the moment when the disaster is about to happen. It very rarely went the other way. And so writing for live and for audience, now writing for audience in stage, is going to undergo an enormous amount of production, and you pretty well, you can pace. George Kaufman paced. Or you can I've sat in the audience through a lot of plays, and it's mildly uncomfortable, but sometimes you get into it. But I find writing stage now, what I'm trying to reproduce, if I have a play in mind, is the way I felt when I saw that play. And I'm thinking, oh man, that was such a surprise. I just loved that moment. There was something about that combination of the characters and the incongruity of the modern character walking to the old-fashioned scene, and how funny she was. And I got to do something like that. It's usually me.
Yeah.
Or Daryl, you know,
Yeah.
glued at the hip, right, for so many years. I'm trying to make him laugh. I'm trying to think like, what would
That's the answer I get a lot, and it's funny because I wanted you to respond to this. Is Zappa would say, I write music for myself. If other people like it, great. And it's like, Frank, in my opinion, that's just my reaction. You're over romanticizing it because you know you live in a consumer culture. You knew if you hit this note and sang this word, kids would buy your music and you'll be able to make more music.
Mhm.
So you do have, you can't erase that. And that a lot of people say that. And what role does the audience play in your creative process? They go, well, I'm the audience, you know, that I'm the person. But so, you know, it's, you really covered it well. And I'm curious if you've ever heard, because I love the pre-release screening philosophy of Hollywood. This shrink or psychologist introduced it to Hollywood. It wasn't a marketing guy, or the history of it is interesting. It's actually Harold Lloyd was the first guy to do pre-release screenings.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and that's a long time. That's 20s. But anyways, it flourished in Harry Shearer tells the story for Spinal Tap. Someone wrote on the pre-release screening the reaction card, good band, good movie, but you should have got a better rock band.
Billy Wilder's favorite comment card was, I laughed so hard I peed in my girlfriend's hand.
Oh, that's great. Because
Uh,
I was going to say the intention, you know, there's this psychic thing happening with us because Billy Wilder also said, and I put it on my notes, make sure you say this when we talk about intention. He said, I just hope they like my movie as much as the popcorn.
yeah. But thinking of audiences too, audiences are hugely variable. Anyone who's tested things multiple times, you know, you can get roars and then the exact same. It's obviously the exact same showing unless you've got a different brightness of bulb. And you can get another audience that seems to have been demographically chosen the same way that just doesn't like it. And then again, too, any hit movie, anything that's going to win the Oscar that year, you walk out of it and stand outside the theater, and you'll hear people coming out going, "Well, I was expecting better than that." You know, this really an audience is. Someone ought to write something about audiences. I know that Goldman has written about them. A lot of people. There's a lot of anecdotes about audiences. I
Yeah.
love the story of how Lita in the Swan was put on by. I can't remember his name now. There was a member of Second City Chicago who wrote a version of the myth of, you know, the girl raped by a swan, right?
Yeah.
And he thought it was funny, I guess. He put it on with it was probably in the early 60s, and the audience actually attacked the actors in the lobby at intermission. Like old ladies attacked them with umbrellas. They were so offended. So there's getting, that's better than feedback cards. You get hit by an umbrella after the first act.
That's well, how about Louis Buñuel? He took rocks in his pocket to a screening of either L'Age d'Or, I think it's L'Age d'Or, and was it, and I asked people, intelligent movie people, this question. It's a stupid question, but it's funny what people say. I says, do you think Louis put the rocks in his pocket to help start the riots? Like, this movie sucks, and throw the, you know, help start the riots, or to protect himself when they go, there's the filmmaker, get him. And
Or he was
you
headed
go
for
ahead.
Virginia, or he was headed for Virginia Woolf's River after the show.
Well, what my favorite answer was, a person said Louis Buñuel just had rocks in his pocket, period.
Yeah.
Okay, this is McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. So clothing extends our skin, knife and fork extend our teeth. You know, non-tangible like religion or
Yeah.
conscious religion could be an extension of consciousness. For the writing utensil, whether it's a pencil, pen, or a keyboard, for you, what humanness does it extend?
Well, I started writing by hand in pen, and then I moved to a typewriter, and then so now a computer. And I think actually my handwriting's terrible, so I stick with a computer and write faster that way. What does that extend of me onto the screen? It makes the evanescent permanent. It makes it examinable. It makes it rewritable, retractable. Something that an actor can't do. You do make a mistake on stage as a performer, and it's public. You can actually, it's something I emphasize with writers about spell check and grammar check. Whatever, the great thing about the computer was that if you are a perfectionist, there you are, man. You can go back
Yeah.
and remove things. You don't have to. Boy, those days of whiteout. I'm a terrible typist too. Um, if you are organized or are disorganized, you can address those things in the form in your writing form on a computer. I mean, you can make multiple. I sometimes do multiple drafts of screenplays, and call one experimental draft one or silly draft, and then I feel much freer to just screw around with it, ruin it, pull big pieces
Yeah.
out. Don't need that, don't need her. Um, that it was hugely freeing because I mean, I started writing sitcoms when you typed it on paper, and if you made a mistake, it's like, damn, you either had to put a little X there, and that was not acceptable if it was a drafter handing in. You actually had to figure it out in your head exactly where you were going. Now to be able to go back, to be able to page up and change the setup line so that you can change the punchline, or so that the punchline you've got seems funnier. And you couldn't do that in a typewriter. I mean, Wilder and Diamond pacing around all day, right? I mean, there's a little clip on um, I think it's on YouTube of Wilder and Diamond at the typewriter, and Wilder paces and says, "How about?" And he stops at the desk. They both think, and he goes, "No," and they both go, "No," and he walks back. He said that was the exemplification of their process. Um,
Just that gap, leaving it. How
yeah,
about and leaving that gap?
yeah, and Daryl and
Yeah.
I can. I mean, we got to the point where we were um, like less than two people crammed in two bodies. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like the overlap between us, despite the strange differences between our abilities and our interests. People were really only getting a person and a half when they hired us. Um,
But, Andrew, I'm curious though, like I asked this poet a couple months ago, what humanness does the writing utensil extend? He goes, tears.
yeah,
Now, I mean, yeah, for a in McLuhan doesn't say humanness, he says human sensorium. My friend goes, that's not even a word. He's meaning a human sense. What human sensorium or sense does the writing utensil extend for you? Did you
well,
already answer it? You said a word I didn't even catch, effervescence or something like that. You said
effervescence, evanescence, the
yeah.
fullness, the volatility, the tendency to evaporate.
Is
Yeah,
that what it extends? Is
you can,
that
particularly for certain types of writing, if you have a jackrabbit mind, and I tend to to benefit from having multiple agnosias. I have no sense of direction. I'm slightly face blind. I'm colorblind, and as your eyesight and your hearing start to go, half of the things you find funny are misreadings of signs, or stuff that you've read upside down and you misinterpreted it. You think, hey, that's
yeah,
funny. So you can fix those things on the page and come back and look at them later. You don't have to
yeah.
like jump them. You don't have to fight them in your head and mix within, the uncreated conscience of your race and the smithy of your soul. Uh, was that
Touche,
Keats? I
that
can't.
was
Yeah,
good.
you can just put it down cold and flat, and then you can await a later self, one that's had coffee, or one that's not so pissed off that you just got a bill for something that you canceled 2 months ago. You say, okay, well, that person is not the ideal editor at the moment.
Yeah,
Let me just put down all the ramifications of this sketch idea. GPS in the future after Armageddon. What GPS warnings would you get that you don't get now? Make a
yeah,
U-turn with the giant screaming cephalopod. Um, you just put them all down and just be the creative. Just use the self that you have access to at that moment, and the sensoria that you can summon on another day. The cheerful, funny, oh, this will be cool guy can sit down and look through those things, and you can be your own collaborator, which was
yeah.
much less possible handwriting, I found. Although you look at Joyce's rewrites on Ulysses, you think, how the hell did anybody typeset this? I mean, he was typesetting. He was making changes on galleys, you know, for sodium
Yes.
beats
Yeah.
2 days before final.
Yeah.
There are still tip-ins in the second edition. Yeah.
Well, that's Picasso's. He went into a art museum and started touching up one of his paintings, and the guard says, "You can't do that." He goes, "I'm the artist." He goes, "Doesn't matter. You still can't do that."
Frank Lloyd Wright would visit people whose houses he would design and rearrange their furniture while he was waiting for dinner.
That's
He would take flowers off of where they'd put them and move them somewhere else because no, that doesn't go there. I'm not that.
Andrew. So I talked to Michael Apted about 40 years ago. I said, "Why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast?" He made a documentary on a Russian rock star. And he says, "Because we've learned to take in information faster." And so most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in 1980 with MTV, quick editing. And Marty Scorsese even said, "I cut my films faster because of MTV." So I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I'm right in between those two. I've no doubt that if you were to have shown the 18-year-old me a trailer for a film that's showing now, even though they annoy me now, I don't see why everything has to be half-second bursts of the greatest, fastest, kablooiest, beautifulest, biggest smoking, fastest bullet shooting. You know, there's so much is marketing in a trailer now, and trailers are cut like videos. I think if you'd show my younger self, who was pretty sharp, I think I would not have had the framework to understand the correlation and non-correlation of the subsequent images. I mean, in those days, so that was us then, that was me then, I was used to having a story told. And if there was a cut, it meant, oh, now we're changing to another place. Not, now we're going to try and whip your ganglia into a froth. Now we're going to try and make soup in your medulla oblongata by showing you so many things that are not connected, that they're all stimulating, and they're all, you know, if it's there's a burning, flaming, gold-leafed swan falling off a waterfall, plunging into an exploding submarine full of aliens. I get so tired. There was I think Dan Charson wrote a piece in the New Yorker few years ago in which he said that most modern films, that is the films exemplifying that kind of editing, MTV editing, are Marvel films now, or superhero films, in which people, he said, people who look nothing like us saving a world that looks nothing like ours. Yeah. And that saddens me. And so along with the type of material that those cuts, you don't see those kind of cuts in the Jane Austen film, right? I mean, you're more likely also in foreign, you know, you see the lilies, you know, the lilies aren't going to be hit by a Scud missile. You get the feeling that you're going to be shown something which is going to move slower than life. It actually is going to, you know, nobody actually pans, you saccade, right? You jump from point to point. The eyes don't pan. They don't move smoothly. You can't do it. You do a series of little jumps. And we've moved closer to a series of little jumps, but with this Billy Pilgrimish looseness from time and sense and everything at the same time. And there are films which use that in sequences, which I wholly enjoy in the 70s and 80s. They're just completely like, wow, how about that sequence in the middle? But everybody seems to want to cut that way entirely now. Yeah. And Scorsese doesn't cut that way entirely. You know, his Fran Lebowitz documentary is a lot of long shots.
He probably said that 40 years ago because it was imposed on him somehow. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. I don't mean to hold him to that, but he said it.
Apted. I don't think of Apted as cutting like that either.
Apted didn't cut like that either, but he was just explaining to me why I said, why do they feel so obliged to edit fast? It didn't even mean they had to edit fast. I mean, that Replacements video is just a speaker going boom, boom, boom the whole time. It's like truly, we were in the experimental film world. We were happy because kids people were getting jobs. Bruce Conner was, making videos for Devo. It was like an amazing moment there for a second until all the videos looked the same and they were all, So the hidden question really is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
No, I mean, what I've read by neuroscientists say no. I mean, you multitasking is like multiplexing. When you send multiple signals on a single wire by breaking up the second into bits, say I take every second, and so your phone call gets bit number 1 from this second and bit number 2 from the next, and the next person's phone call has bit number 2 of that 100th of a second and bit number 2 of the next 100th, and together we can each hear our conversations. We can't do that with information. No, you switch. I mean, there have been very decisive experiments about how much is retained when you try to multitask. I don't know if you've seen the videos in which you're watching a basketball game and you're asked to count how many times the ball is passed, and the clip's only 20 seconds long, I think. And you watch it and you watch, okay, that's a pass, and you're allowed to count bounce passes. So the video ends and you say 8. There were 8 passes, and the person says, "What about the gorilla?" And you haven't even noticed. You rewind it and play it again. There's a guy in a gorilla suit walking right across the court, and nobody notices it. So if you can't even notice a gorilla while you're counting basketballs, I think the possibility of listening to Courtney Barnett while you're doing your homework is probably pretty slim. You're multiplexing. You're stopping one, doing the other. Stop one, doing the other.
That's they showed Edmund Carpenter, the anthropologist who worked with McLuhan. They showed people in Africa a movie, and they'd never seen movies before. And the two characters are in the middle of the screen talking, and then a chicken ran through on the side, and they tried to figure out what happened to you guys when you watch this film, how to make you feel, and go, where'd that chicken go? They didn't even care about the characters. They just saw the little chicken run through, which no one noticed. Is just part of the environment.
We did a pilot once, Daryl and I. We did a series called Pelswick for a couple of years. David Arquette was the star. It's funny that they'd originally wanted the part of God, who is this mystical figure who advises a kid in a wheelchair, to be played by Keith Richards. They couldn't get Keith Richards, so they got David Arquette. It's like, that's a strange change. But there was an episode, might have been the pilot, in which, so the God character, was called Mr. Jimmy, would pop up in strange ways. And so the kid puts a quarter in a vending machine as he wants a snack, and out the slot comes Mr. Jimmy. And Mr. Jimmy interferes with his life that week, as he does in every week. And we tested the audience, and the audience at the end, every kid wanted to know if he got his quarterback. That was what fixed them. And they couldn't, and I've learned that too with stage. If you have somebody, you may not remember what went on between the characters in a play, but if someone loans someone $100 in the beginning, and then they say, here, I got 30 of that money I owed you, at the half, everybody knows he still owes him $70. You just can't help doing the math. It's distracting. So I try never have writing on a stage or on a set, as little as possible, because some people just go right to that big M in the Mary Tyler Moore's living room, and they just can't help reading. You can't help doing math. You can't help multiplying things or getting frustrated by your inability to do so. That's the multiplexing thing.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
In court, it would probably be compromise. So the question is what's more important for you, to stay with your convictions, to hold with your convictions, or to say I have to let this go in order to move forward? Well, it's completely situation dependent. If your conviction is we mustn't have a fascist country, I think that's pretty heavy at the moment. I value compromise, but it's part of Karl Popper's thing about tolerance. We must not compromise. We must be uncompromising about our insistence on compromise, and that's just slight category. It's a set theoretic paradox. It's like we must not tolerate intolerance. But yeah, I think compromising and convictions, they're both a sliding scale.
Yeah. There's these three elements: luck, skill, and ambition. How do you rate them in your accomplishments? You've accomplished a lot. How would you rate just in general? What order would you put those 3?
Well, remember, too, that they can't be measured by the same metric. So putting anything in an order slightly assumes that
Yeah.
you can weigh them the same way. And oh, this one is 73%, and this one's um, luck, which includes circumstances of birth. I always feel lucky. Um, but going back to the prayer question, I don't feel that there's anyone to feel lucky to.
Yeah.
It's just like that's the way it fell. And um, ambition. I was not very ambitious early on. I told you I had no idea that there were even jobs of this sort. And most people don't have any idea that there are jobs of this sort. Darryl once had a girlfriend who he told he was a comedy writer. She said, "What do you do all day?" And he said, "Write comedy." She said, "How? What do you mean? Like how? What do you mean?" Because people confuse it with performance. I guess you can't be
Yeah.
performing all day. So how can you write all day? Skill Skill can be sharpened, um, and it can be sharpened partly by ambition.
Yeah.
And your ambition can be shaped by what you discover of your skills, and sometimes they're not even the skills you think you have. You can find you have people skills or or are severely deficient in them, and that can steer. You can think you have musical skill, and then realize you're no good and give up your band and end up as a comedy writer. Um, it's a good mix, and I bet there's more things. I bet those aren't just the RGB of accomplishment. I'm sure
Yep.
there's some other colors in there. I don't know what they would be because they're pretty wide categories. But luck would have to include fortuitous circumstance of every kind. And man, we had quite a few. But as they say, half of your competition, or is it a quarter of your competition, quits every year in some fields. They just give up. And so as long as you stay in there, eventually, even Ed Wood gets to make a movie.
Yep. It's beautiful what you said because I love how you basically break down the question. It's very helpful for me and I appreciate it. But I want to tell you, what's RGB stand for, by the way?
Red, green, blue.
Oh, red, green,
It's the color, it's the yeah.
thank you. So, uh, I got a lot of my questions or some of them from Christine McKenna, who was a great writer, and I started reading her interviews. I go, "This is a great," and that was my first question I got from her was, "What's more important, conviction or compromise?" That got me going 40 years ago asking. And the second question was, "Is ambition based more on fear or joy?" And how do you think, and then I changed it to the way I asked
Mm,
you. I'm gonna tell you why I changed it, but how do you think most people answered, "Is ambition based more on fear or joy?"
I would expect most people would say joy because it seems like a more positive way to present yourself. I mean,
Right, and it was more fear. They were more
hmm,
saying fear. They were like, "I wish it was joy,
um,
but I think it's fear." And to clarify, it's like your observations of humans is see, when you say, "Is ambition based more on fear or joy?" It's implied for you or for your observations of humans. So the reason I changed it was a couple years ago, I read a William Friedkin interview, and he said, in Hollywood, skill and luck have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition. And he's pretty much an intelligent guy to talk about film in a way. And I thought, well, I'll change it. So my friend said, luck, skill, and ambition. He goes, none of those. Mine is necessity. So
mm,
it is more than those 3 indeed. So I liked how you
necessity, that's good, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and I think if you've decided, I mean, as Friedkin, if he said ambition, I think perhaps at the time that question was asked, he was probably thinking about certain people who are successful other than him. It may not have been an answer about himself because I'm sure he wouldn't deny that he was skillful. He was, by the way, the director. He was the director on the Kiddie Show, the Uncle Bucky Show in Chicago with my late manager Ted Ziegler was a Kiddie Show host, and the Uncle Bucky Show out of WGN in Chicago was directed by William Friedkin, very
Wow.
young Will Friedkin.
Yeah.
Um, if you're looking at this, if you're the kind of person who's always gnawing at the like he made it and he's lousy, he's no good, I don't understand. He just bought a new house, and like I've read this stuff, he's lousy. Then I guess you're going to say ambition and luck. You're going to remove the skill because you don't like that person. Um, and the ambition and joy, I mean, fear and joy. Um, I would say the ambition of a certain recent president seems to be more fear,
Yeah.
fear-based anger. You know, I don't see any joy
Yeah.
in Donald Trump of any kind at any point.
Yeah.
Um, it would be an interesting to know what that would have done to him, or if he would still would he be constituted as we think of him in any way if you were
Yeah.
to add joy.
Yeah.
Even
In
the, even the dishwashing, even the dishwashing liquid, I would consider adding to him. Yeah.
that great scene where De Niro gives his card in King of Comedy. Like he's a business card. My luck. Anyways, that was a good crossover. Gary Player, the golfer, says a great line I love to repeat is the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Yeah. I'm a great believer in luck, and I find that the harder I work, the more I have of it. Stephen Leacock, 1922. So
Wow.
that precedes Gary Player. Leacock was one of my early heroes.
Wait, what is it? Say that one again?
I'm a great believer in luck, and I find that the harder I work, the more I have of it. Stephen Leacock.
So
So he's the Canadian
Gary got it
equivalent.
from him. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if Leacock even had taken it from some of his near contemporaries, if it had come from the likes of George Ade, or it sounds also a bit Will Rogers-y, you know.
It does sound like that. Yeah, and again, that's where we can go to quote investigator and hope they break it down for us.
Yeah. And almost all the quotes on the internet are wrong, you know, whether it's attributed to George Carlin, Einstein, or Stephen Wright. It turns out that almost nobody said the things that are commonly.
Right.
They just accumulate the lint of like opinions as they go.
But I do like wiki quote when at the end misattributed. So it does suss out that we like to say so and so said this, but so and so didn't, and it's a form of quote investigator.
And George Carlin had a page on his website pointing out that he didn't say all these things.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Horribly, I would have to say that my first reaction would be to say that it's in mathematics or in the mathematical
Wow. Why horribly? What does that mean?
Because that turns off everyone to whom I've ever mentioned it, and it kills party conversation, and it's alien seeming, and I know it's alien seeming. But I do tend to dream of and think of things in their relation to other things in the form of mathematical schema, either number theoretic or algebraic or topographic. And that's not always been the case. I just read an awful lot. I was lousy in math in school, and then one day when I was about 25, there was a PBS documentary on unsolved mathematical problems, and I recorded it, my first VCR, I think, 85, 86, because I didn't, what does that mean, unsolved mathematical problems? You just get a calculator and you solve them. And I got completely sucked into the world of number theory. And just reading about people who had tackled things that were unknowable, seemingly unknowable, and found incredibly ingenious ways. And so I read every book I could find about, E and pi and the four-color problem and Riemann hypothesis and the Goldbach conjecture and the Collatz conjecture and the ABC problem, and started having read a lot of them, they just linked together. They all just joined hands, and I tend to see things that way. I mean, language, science is written in the language of mathematics. It's like the operating system down there. And I'm still not good at it. I still can't multiply in my head or anything, but I have such a reverence for this unseen, this amazing, perfectly internally consistent world. Everybody's looking for the answer, right? Well, if you prove something in mathematics, you proved it forever. Whatever Euclid proved, whatever Hippias proved when he brought the Pythagorean brotherhood, the proof that there was no fraction that equaled the square root of 2. They tried to hide it. They reportedly took him out in a boat and drowned him, hoping that no one else would discover what he had discovered. It's a 6-line proof. It's very short. It's sweet. But of course, if some guy in 300 BC had discovered it, you can't hide it forever, because their motto of their thing was all is number. and it can't be all number. If even the square root of 2 isn't a fraction, what does that mean? Isn't a fraction? Everything can be a fraction. No, no, no. I just love that stuff, and even the proof of impossibility is just completely enraptures me, and that I have to kind of subsume. It doesn't work well it doesn't work well in scripts. I always have to remove mathematics and mathematical proofs and facts from scripts, from monologues, from jokes. I take them out of definitely dinner party conversation, unless I'm lucky enough to be seated next to someone who's got that. We worked in Ramsey theory for 10 years. Then I can just talk their ear off. Yeah.
Well, since this is live TV and we don't edit, it's on there forever until the world gets rid of YouTube, and we've switched it over to archive.org. Thank God. Two of my film heroes say, George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me.
Mm.
Is art making, writing, more self-expression or more you're a vehicle? Not you, or the idea of the artist is more a vehicle for whatever technology, culture, or environments are dominant.
When you add all that stuff up, technology, culture, environment, history, memory, sense memory, aesthetics, history of aesthetics, cultural criticism, it's all you put that tapestry together, and many people would say you get a large part of what is the self. And the parts of all that stuff that you have absorbed and internalized, the part your ear goes to, the part your eye goes to, is not what anyone else's ear would go to in the same environment, looking at the same Renoir, listening to the same Mendelssohn. You're going to pull that little piece of it out that you think of as you think of as your observations. But a lot of the anti-free will people could say, well, you don't really have that much choice in the matter. We can actually predict what is you. So yeah, it's flowing through you, and it is you at the same time. You are the river that you're stepping in some sense.
Well put. Can art making be egoless?
No, probably not. I mean, the ego being a person. I mean, you could make something that would probably be good enough to hang in a gallery without a person, right? A computer could generate something with the right set of instructions. And then you'd say, well, yes, the person who actually programmed the computer is the artist. It's like that gorilla that took a picture of itself now has the photographic credit as the photographer. If you saw that lawsuit. So the ego is the wanting self, the identified self as such. To make art, I don't know if it's art if you don't have someone saying, here I am, look at this. It's illustration, maybe, or that might insult illustrators, or it's patterns, or it's joyful patterns, or it's wallpaper, or it's a consistent tone, or it's the wind through the trees. A lot of people, you get maybe certain tonal musicians, atonal experimental musicians would say, oh, the wind through a series of reeds drawn tight and tuned so that the frequencies are the exact lengths of all the north-south streets in Manhattan, in proportion, with wind blowing through it, would play Manhattan. It's like, well, where's the ego in that? That's an idea, but really an algorithm theoretically could have generated that and played it, but it doesn't represent anybody, does it? It's clever. I'd think that was really cool to see it, but I'd want to know a little more about the artist and why they did it. But can you remove the artist entirely from that and say, I'd like to see a museum show of stuff which is a mixture, and you had to guess, the little cards to lift up to find out if the music is created by a randomizer hooked to something, or if this is from someone, in their third year at Fanshawe College of Art.
Yeah, it's funny because most people said, can art making be egoless? No. Once in a while, people go, yes, great art is egoless. So you sussed it out. It's a bigger picture because it's what we define. I mean, sometimes I'm smart-assy and I follow the question with, was Freud right?
Oh boy, I read all of his stuff when I was a teenager. For some reason, I thought he was the answer to a lot of stuff. The 23 Lectures in Psychoanalysis, and I got disabused of everything bit by bit step by step as they went along. I mean, he made some great, the discovery and elaboration of the unconscious, but even that, everything gets taken apart, the Newtonians get taken apart by Einsteinian physics, and it's always something else that says, well, actually, if you look at it closer, it's this. So
Yeah.
I guess you got to respect everybody who came along. Was he right? I don't know. Was anyone
But
right?
yeah, it's funny because I asked this big shot Hollywood director at USC with all the film students there, and he made this film and about, it was about psychology. And I put it into context. I says, was Freud right? And he goes, that's beyond my pay grade. And then eventually in the discussion and Q&A, he returned to it and talked about it. Because, usually they go, about what?
Yeah, like, was the Good Humor Man right? Well, yeah, the Nutty Buddy was 35 cents. What else does he have to be right about? He had his little sphere of influence. And the film classes, I mean, I roomed for a while with a woman who was in film class and went to all those showings, and it's just I really recommend it to beginning writers for an idea of what you get if you have equipment and no ideas. And I've
Yeah.
spoken and lectured at and seen a lot of stuff subsequent at colleges, which are well equipped with all the best equipment, but you get the same stories from everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody has somebody who wakes up, smokes a bowl, goes to the kitchen, there's no food in the kitchen, scratches their ass, goes outside, walks down the sidewalk. Lots of them walking down the sidewalk because that's what you've got. You've got a camera and you've got some guy who, in a plaid shirt. But they're all the same. They're the same in Toronto, Vancouver. You can look at German student films from the 1920s. There was even a DVD that I got like 15 years ago, and it was long lost student films from the 1930s and 40s. Wow. And it was like 6 hours long, and they were an average of 10 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
But they were all the same. They were all dull looking people sitting smoking in cafes, and so they had no dialogue.
Yeah.
Nothing happened to anybody
Yeah.
because they couldn't afford any kind of special effects. They only had so many friends to appear in the films. They had a camera and primitive lights, and maybe some of them had a steady cam or something. But you can have the equipment. So the ego, in some sense, the expression of a human idea disappears, and all you have is the effect, is the equipment. People walking around. It's a good lesson to learn if you want to write stories.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Not lately. There's a Larkin poem called The Least Deceived. And though that's not what this is about, I always thought it would be nice to be the least deceived. I remember thinking it in high school, like, okay, there's some stuff that's true and some stuff that's not true. And in school, we're supposed to be learning, but obviously that's not what they're doing because we're not branching out really. We're getting Canadian history and we're getting, how to dissect a frog. But I would really like to not be fooled about things. But I've been caught up to my 50s, into my 50s by things that I had heard, not urban myths exactly, because I got a really good eye and ear for those, Hemingway's built-in shockproof bullshit detector. I really can tell when things just don't have that right. But there are little tiny things which I believed that weren't serving anything. There were memes like, 25% of all mints by the cash register in a restaurant have urine on them. You think about that for half a second, you think, of course, people go to the bathroom, then they go and pay, and they take them in. But that doesn't explain, and it's the kind of thing that Mythbusters tested for years, or that the guy on the Veritasium channel sometimes veers into. Although, I do not like. I love to find out that I'm wrong about things.
Yeah.
I'm glad that there are fewer of them as I age.
Yes. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I have various agnosias, as I said, things that my head does not put together well. And I just have no luck with history or geography. I managed to struggle through them in school. There were definite weaknesses. They were bad for me academically, always. Every time I fly, I pull out the in-flight magazine and I look at the map of the world Like this kid I used to know who wanted to be a musician would go home after school and listen to a metronome. He would sit in his bedroom and listen to a metronome because he had no sense of rhythm. He thought by listening to metronome, that was no more possible than it is for me to remember where Wisconsin is. I mean, I
Yeah.
really can't um, assemble shapes.
Yeah.
I've studied, I've done that test when you try to remember all 213 countries and you have 15 minutes, you have to type them as fast as you can and they appear on the map as soon as you type them. And then if you finally get it, before the 15 minutes, I've done that for the countries of the world and the capitals of the world, but it takes me forever. My wife can do it. Janet can do it usually the second try. She's just good at that. Daryl could probably do it without even studying. For some reason, he has that kind of brain. But not knowing that stuff has led me to make the kind of faux pas that are conducive to humor.
Yeah.
Like, I may have said this in the first, sorry if I did, but in the first round of this interview, I was looking at Daryl's daughter had her index cards for studying on the office floor one day, and they're upside down. As I walked in, I'm looking at them all upside down, and one of them looked like it said "Ask Megadeth," and I said, "Ask Megadeth." That sounds like the world's worst advice show. We laughed because I read it wrong. We were pitching it at MTV within like a week, and they liked the idea. Megadeth didn't want to do it. We asked Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop was interested, so it was going to be Ask Iggy. So the idea of if you're going to make mistakes, so being able to make the mistake in the first place, but then not instantly correct it, but to learn slowly to take this weakness, and having no sense of direction is just another additional problem normally. That doesn't usually give me many jokes because I end up in Sacramento when I'm driving to San Diego. But it leads towards, if you can relax the esophagus enough to swallow the sword, if you can learn to overcome the gag reflex in which we normally correct ourselves, it can take you to some pretty cool places. You can get ideas for dialogue for characters, not always stupid characters. Sometimes it can take you I can give you the idea of the title of something. I misread something the other day as Lee Barney Oswald, and I thought, oh, that's a cartoon kid hitman, a purple dinosaur that kills the president, Lee Barney Oswald. But I'm actually working on that as the root of something at the moment. It gets transformed, and you have to be able to you have to have the mind to take advantage of it and not get stuck in the temporary delusion. But I think I have no history, the world history. I never have understood. The history was always taught, and so, and so, and then if it was taught as and next, and then next, and then this happened, and this happened, it was, why did the 100 Years' War end at the certain, I don't know. It's the weather that day. I don't know. It could have been, no, it was because Henry Plantagenet had the strength from his and the extra money in his treasury. No, that's not it. You're just making that up. That's like reading the Wall Street Journal's account every morning of why the stock market's gone up. They don't know. They don't know. So that's the way
Yeah.
I assemble things wrong.
Yeah.
And the wrongness is useful. If I was a poet, I'm sure it'd be even more useful.
Andrew, you really put it well, and bringing up Iggy was great because how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough? He said, my band was so bad at imitating the Rolling Stones, we invented punk rock. So it's a good illustration of turning a breakdown into a breakthrough, a weakness into a strength.
Although, that's retrospectively justifiable because he became successful and people love the Stooges as bad as they often were. And there are plenty of people who were worse than them or in between them and the Rolling Stones who never went anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Anyways, you create what you resist. It's a saying. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. That's Joyce. And Louis Buñuel said, thank God I'm an atheist. So just this idea of,
we're back to God again.
Yeah, it's that aside, actually, is you create what you resist. One, not you, Andrew, but one creates what one resists. Any comment on that in general of your observations of humans?
I would say British humor would be a good example of that because the British resist embarrassment. And they like order of a certain type and politeness, but the idea of public embarrassment. But if you look at the Pythons, the Goons, Beyond the Fringe, all the outstanding British humorists of the middle of the 21st century, 20th century, and they're dealing almost entirely with and creating somebody complaining about a dead parrot or
Yeah.
something in public that they just would absolutely shun if it happened to them. And I recognize, coming out of England and then starting to write, doing exactly that thing. So if you resist disorder, do you write order? I don't know. Ionesco didn't. He actually added more disorder. It's an interesting starting point. It's an interesting wash to put behind your oil painting.
Yes, very
Yeah,
good.
resisting something.
Can you forget to die?
You can forget yesterday.
How do you find peace of mind?
Um, See the happy moron. He doesn't give a damn. I wish I were a moron. My God, perhaps I am. That's a poem that goes back probably 100 years. And it's the idea that, the French, celui qui augmente sa science augmente sa douleur. He who increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Peace of mind can come with having less to think about. And anyone who suffered from severe anxiety, I'm sure, would tell you that if they could just shut down that little cycle, that they have going. And the neurologist would say it's the caudate nexus and the hippocampus recycling ideas, creating OCD. And so you get peace of mind when you're able to shut down that cycle chemically. Even you can do that and stop worrying that you haven't washed your hands enough today, or that you didn't tap the doorknob 8 times exactly before you entered the room. My mind's pretty peaceful as it is. I think I worry that it's sometimes too much. So I read about really intriguingly complex people who are plagued by every manner of all those biographies I read. People who are just so troubled. I think, it wouldn't be bad to just sample that. To be really troubled and worried and Keatsy and tubercular and sick and dying and horrified. The fear that I should cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain. That stuff. But I can just sit back and have some chocolate and take a nap. So I don't know.
Nice.
I've never really fought to try and get peace of mind, except on certain shows I was on where I was just like, wished I was dead.
Yeah.
And on those, the only answer was to get the show canceled or be replaced as we were once, or not deal with usually the star.
Yeah.
Have someone else do it.
Really well put. If you were walking down the street today, you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Don't get married just because someone will do your laundry.
Nice.
That's okay. That's glib, but that I'm thinking of me in particular and me at 12 in particular. And 12 was a magical year. It was the year the Beatles recorded the last album, and I started writing with Daryl and started to get the idea that, hey, there's an adult life possible. What would I have said? Maybe I'd probably just be really glib and say, keep it up. Or I would remind myself of something that I thought at 8, which I still remember. And then I'd be freaked out for the rest of my life. I just keep walking,
On what occasion do you lie?
When asked, how do I look in this? Oh,
Which
God,
way
I hope Janet doesn't watch this.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
I'm an overer because it's closer.
Closer, thank you.
Yeah.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
My thoughts exactly.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Grapefruit.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Where would it be displayed? I don't want to be made of. It would be interesting to have an ice statue in, let's say, in Oshawa, the town I was born, just because I just can't imagine what they would make of it, or if they could figure out who it was before it melted.
Nice. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
That last part's tricky.
Yeah.
Because you've got to call it good to get started and I would never want to be independently wealthy.
Yep.
I'm sure people would think of that as a good, but it would have entirely removed the spring from my watchworks.
So the three answers I get the most are fame, money, and heroin.
Well, that's funny that people would think heroin was good. Yeah,
Yeah.
fame, I've never met anyone who was famous who was really happy, but I've only met a certain slice of the powerful and famous. And it's not always that the fame made them unhappy either. Sometimes just general discontent is what drove them from being nowhere to being successful.
Yep. Just a few more, Andrew. This has been really fun and enlightening. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions, just off the top of your head in a few words. Who started it all?
Who started it all? I'll say Pete Townsend.
Are we going to make it?
Almost certainly, but period.
Nice. Where do we put it?
That's good. I'm trying to anagram it. See, I'm doing the wrong thing with the question.
That's all right.
I'll say Allentown, Pennsylvania.
That
But
town
you
is
haven't had that
mentioned.
before.
Huh? That town is mentioned in Frank Zappa's song. Do you know that?
No, which one?
Yeah, yeah. He says it's 200-year-old. It's a song about America, and he says, "I'm sitting in Allentown, Pennsylvania, with a glass of orange juice the size of my baby finger."
Oh, yeah. I know Billy Joel's living here in Allentown. Yeah.
Allentown, yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, where do we put it? Who's cleaning it up?
Whoever spilt it.
Is it serious?
No, it's Polaris.
You are fun. I appreciate this. Okay, a couple more. Let's see. If you were in a vat, this is not Alan Watts. We're done with Alan. You were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face. What would you do?
I would try not to drop it because that would raise the level of the surrounding liquid
That's good.
by the principle of displacement.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Oh, that's good. Um, um, Among the young only, because I taught fairly recently and see just a shift of reverence for other people and I would call it the goopy LA California West Coast elitist liberalism shift towards just open-mindedness and treating
Yeah.
people better. And I and
I like
I was very taken by that. That
Yeah.
from my last college experience, very different.
Yeah. But do you think it's different from when we were, teenagers and college students? You think it's increased a little?
It certainly felt different. There was
Yeah.
well, so I entered college in '76. So, yeah, it was, like, just post Watergate and, punk was starting in England, and so the Great Dissatisfaction and the Depression and, yeah. I was in a class of 150 journalism students, and we had a lot of dropouts, and there were a lot of people who were there because they wanted to cover the next Watergate. They wanted I mean, the idealism came off them like orange peel. I mean, it just,
Yeah.
it came off though. By third year there were 25 people left, and I think the high idealism is more baked in now, and it's certainly more urgent than
Yeah.
it was then. Then it seemed to be fashionable almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Lou Welsh was a beat poet and an ad person. He
He
said,
wrote Raid Kills Bugs Dead.
dude, you know everything. This is fun.
Yeah.
Raid, what a beat poem. Raid kills bugs dead. That is the epitome of a beat poem.
He's
But
also the stepfather of Huey Lewis, of Huey Lewis and the News.
he is?
Yeah.
Wow.
He
I didn't
was. Yeah.
stepdad. Yeah. Okay. He said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. Thornton Wilder in 28 said, art is confession, art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, It's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Hmm.
It's a stupid question, but this is how I ask it. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes, Andrew. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Changes from day to day. I mean, sometimes it's I can be out just walking and I think this is great. This is all I need. I'm just gonna walk outside in the sun and look at butterflies. That's man, my son's happy, my wife's successful, and this is cool. I think I'll have a Coke. And other days it's about ripping the dark scab off the underbelly of the human psyche because of some article I read, and they're both fine. They're
Yeah.
both fine, and even, I'm prone to depression. I've been medicated for depression for, like half of my life, it seems. I manage to get through things sometimes, even the bad things, by remembering every gambler loses, right? You have bad days, and you're gonna end up, they're gonna wipe your chips off the table eventually. I wouldn't say have a good time because I'm not a good time guy really, but I really don't sweat the small things means defining what the small things are.
Yeah.
But just try to lighten everybody's load a little.
Yeah.
And if things are really awful, just duck your head down and ride them out if you can. I know that's a terrible thing to say to some people who have years long slumps. There's luck again. I've learned not to push things too hard, but if you get an opportunity to do something that excites you, if you get an opportunity to solve a puzzle, go for it, man. Just really go for it. If you get an opportunity to zip line, we always try to do one new thing a year. We try to do one new thing we've never done before. I rode a mule a couple of years ago. So the thing is, if you do one new thing every year you've never done before, skydiving, bungee diving or something like that, or speaking, in public or opening for a rock band. As you get older, the safe things you've already done, and you actually are artificially steered towards the riskier, stupider things. And I find that kind of interesting.
That is super cool. And there's a lot of full circle things here, and there's something, the word wit in our first part. And I went in and I'd love to do a whole salon on wit, sarcasm, paradox, satire, just explore all that which you've delved so deep into. But it's funny because etymologically, the word wit, its first thing it says is mental capacity.
Yeah.
Then it says the word understanding. And I like that because McLuhan had that line, understanding is not having a point of view. And then they give the Voltaire quote, a witty saying says nothing. And then they give a Stendhal quote. It says, wit ought to be 5 degrees above the ideas that form the intelligence of an audience, which I was really like,
That wacky Stendhal.
and then I was saying, but.
And then you get Alexander Pope, in Human Nature Dress. That was what was oft thought, but ne'er so well expressed.
Yeah, that's good too. But I'm just curious, is that the human condition? Why? Well, actually, I
can tell you one thing, wit is certainly not the human condition.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying is I don't have a question, but I'm curious your take on your pursuit of the wit, because you're not just like comedy is yuck funny laughs. The sophisticated wit people, and you've studied them.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, it's a whole salon we could do, but just I don't know what question to ask you, but why did you gravitate towards wit and not towards just
Well, and not towards mathematics or watchmaking, both of
there
and
you
all
go. That's
and
it.
I
There
and I
you go.
say all
Thank you
three
for asking the question. Yeah.
all three of those things
Yeah.
involve something I talked about before of taking something immensely difficult and compressing it. And what
Yeah.
Dorothy Parker would come up with, what the great wits, what George Kaufman would come up with.
Yeah.
I admired that and stared at it and just like reread it and couldn't, like, how is that possible? You look at Einstein's realization about the cows at the electric fence, the dream he had when he was 15, where he began to understand time and and the analysis of the moment and the speed of light, and just an amazing, you think, you just look at it, you think, oh my God, no one can do that. That's just
Yeah.
astounding. That's amazing. That's as close to reverence as I could get with wit and an amazing art ability, just an extraordinary ability to distill an emotion into a picture, even a line drawing, and a joke, and a really good magic, like, oh, that's
Yeah.
impossible. That's impossible. And not show your, unlike the teacher, don't show your work. Yeah,
Yeah.
don't. Wit. I guess being a fairly shy, small, the smallest kid in a high school of 1,400 people, a little wit would have helped. Um, as I was being maltreated.
Yeah.
You
And,
don't have to carry a gun.
yeah.
Although
And
wit plus a gun can be very effective.
and Andrew, the answer you gave to the secret question, I remembered what I wanted to follow up with, because you had this attitude. It can be beautiful and nice taking a walk, or it could be the underbelly. You said that's, it's comprehensive, that it's both, and it depends on what day. And it seemed like a question. It leads perfectly into the last question. But before I ask the last question, where do you think you got that? More from the way your parents raised you, or on your own?
It felt like it was on my own, and that is from books,
Yeah,
from stuff, because my parents weren't great readers. Um, yeah, although the way I do it, I can see the genetic overlap with the cleverness of my father and the literary. And that my mother was actually acted on the London stage, which I didn't even know until I was in my 20s and 30s. She never mentioned it. So that from my mom. And who knows about grandparents, and maybe there was a great joke writer back in the 1700s. I don't
yeah.
know. Doesn't seem likely though.
Andrew, the last question is, and I hope this continues forever, and we do meet up at bookstores and
Yes.
cocktail parties and yap away. Um, what gives you the most optimism?
The idea of tomorrow.
Yeah,
Um, just the idea. Just having something to go towards. Um, and sometimes that can have a negative aspect, because you're saying, "Oh, tomorrow I can get done what I can't do today." So it's like, "Oh man, I can't do this." Well, there's always tomorrow. But the fact that you can fix things, writers can fix things. Actors have more trouble with that. You perform and it's done. But the fact that it's going to be there,
yeah,
and I may not even be in it. you know, I don't exercise that much. Um, that makes me feel, oh, there's room. There's room. There's
yeah.
room, there's time, there's an infinite piece of tiled space for the cat to chase the mouse across.
Beautiful. That was one of the last questions they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. They said, "What gives you the most optimism?" And he said, "Other people." In the
Funny.
first question I ask is, "What's the best thing for a human being?" And I got that from a friend who studied Wilhelm Reich, and they would say, "Other people."
Hmm,
So it's interesting that we need each other, and dang, I need you. That was really fun, Andrew. Thank
That
you
was
so.
great. That was a mind-opening experience, and I shall now process that. I shall turn that into the meat of something. It'll turn up as the fine grain in some packaged meat with plastic
Well,
over it somewhere.
I hope we can make some. Yeah, there's no sacred cows. You make them into hamburger patties. That's what Krasner would say. But I'm going to hit the end button. But I hope this never ends, and we continue the dialogue. Thank you so
Wait, when
much.
you hit that button, that means I'll cease to exist, right?
On live TV, that is. You will continue in in well, we call it the discorporate. We're in
Yes.
we've been McLuhan said, when you're on a telephone, you're without a body. But when you're on a Zoom, you're seeing the body. The heavy through line there is telephones premiered kinda in 39 at the New York World's Fair, the year Finnegan's Wake came out. And then 68, we actually saw it as a kind of reality in 2001.
Yeah.
And that was like you saw the guy call his daughter on a telephone, talking real time, happy birthday.
Yeah.
And they asked Kubrick, why did you make 2001? He said, to convolate McLuhan. Then Marshall was invited to the first, talk about pre-release screenings. One of the first pre-release screenings, Stanley had him, and Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes.
Well, by 10 minutes, there hasn't even been any dialogue yet in 2000.
Right.
So I
But
can see him being
supposedly,
there.
that's one of those stories you could look into. And then he woke up and blah, blah,
Oh
blah,
God, there's
whatever.
McLuhan. Give him a nudge.
Give
Yeah.
him a nudge.
Just give him a
Thank
kiss.
you so much, Andrew. I really love this. And
I will see you IRL, as the kids say, at some point, and I look forward to it.
I like that. I'm going to Google that right now so I know what you're talking. I'm going to break the code.
It's in real life, man.
Oh, in real life. In
Yeah.
real life. I got it.
All right.
I don't need no Google.
Press
Okay.
the button and end me.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.